So now that we've really narrowed down our needs into one specific role, the most important or the most critical role at this point, the one that makes most sense to succession plan for, now we can really drill down and understand what's important for that specific role. And what we call that is our success profile. And in building that success profile, it should capture requirements of the position both today and more importantly, the future. The critical pieces here are, imagine the individual in this role has probably been there 15, 20, 25 years. It's very difficult to separate Joe Smith from CFO. But it's really important when we're building this success profile to think of the role, the position, all by itself, separate from Joe. As you can imagine, if you think of an individual like this at your organization, when individuals have been in a role for a long time, a lot of times their role will bleed into other areas of the organization. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, but when we're building requirements for the role, think of the role by itself. In generating this information, we need to gather input from a variety of sources. Certainly the current incumbent is a really great resource. They've been doing the role for a significant length of time. That can both be a positive and a negative. The positive part is obviously they know the role better than anyone else. The negative is they base their knowledge of the role on what they've been doing for the last 20 to 25 years. What we want to do is we want to build this success profile for what's needed in the future. So you can see that the incumbent's perspective can only be one perspective in this process. A really great resource that's sometimes not used are that individual's direct reports. A lot of times they certainly have a great perspective and knowledge about what that role does because they've been working for that individual for several years. And they also have a little bit different perspective and an eye towards the future. So I think collectively, if we gather the information from our incumbent, their direct reports, and essentially the executive management team would consolidate that data together and come up with really the best fit for what that success profile looks like. And finally, the one really critical piece that weaves through this success profile is your organization's strategy. If we're building a success profile for the future, we need to know where the organization is going to go in the future. So for example, if your organization is planning for really aggressive growth over the next 3 to 5 years, you can imagine that what a chief marketing officer does today for a company of 50 employees is going to be very, very different if our company is going to be 500 employees 5 years from now. So that strategy piece is a really critical piece as we're building the success profile. So building the success profile itself, in terms of the steps, it's a relatively simple process. What we want to do from a pure logistics standpoint is for each success profile, we'd want the position, the individual in the position, their planned exit year if we know, and it's actually a great excuse to have the conversation with the incumbent if you haven't already. And the urgency, which is obviously really closely related to that exit date. We want to list the position requirements, and from a position criteria standpoint, it's best if we have a job description that we can at least use as a baseline. Certainly that may or may not be outdated. It will act as a baseline, and then we would gather input on from both the incumbent and their direct reports in terms of what would be needed for the future. And finally, again, just as a reminder, and I probably sound like a little bit of a broken record, but it's really critical to always remind yourself, are we thinking of the person, or are we thinking of the role? So those normal requirements, so for example, your CFO obviously needs an accounting designation, maybe 15 plus years in finance, etc. That's the relatively easy part. But we all know that leadership is clearly determined by a variety of factors, including things like competency, character, and emotional intelligence that you've probably heard a lot more of within the last few years. Scientifically validated assessments, which is a core part of our business at Sigma, are an excellent way to measure current talent and actually inform discussions about what's important for the future. So we've talked about gathering information from the incumbent, from their direct reports, certainly from the senior management team, but assessments can really close that loop and really add a lot of objective data to the process. And finally, the key piece here is we've developed our success profile. We have a lot of really great information, and essentially this is the target. This is what we're shooting for as we develop successors into this role. But remember, this is not a static document. This is going to change maybe even on a year-to-year basis. So we recommend once you develop the document, actually put in your calendar, at least on an annual basis, to review and challenge the assumptions in that document.